a superstar's hidden tears, a dressing room confession, and a love threatened by fame. Can truth survive when the world is watching? Jungkook smiles at the camera, but cries in the dressing room. Jimin finds him and hears the confession. I'm afraid the world took you from me. I can't breathe in here. The words were barely audible over the roar of the stadium, swallowed by bass vibrations and the chant of tens of thousands of voices screaming his name. Under the blinding white lights, Jungkook smiled, perfect, radiant, untouchable, his eyes curving into crescents for the cameras sweeping across the stage. Pyrotechnics erupted behind him, heat licking the back of his neck, the scent of smoke and metal thick in his lungs. From the outside, he was invincible. From the inside, he was already breaking. The final note rang out. Fireworks exploded into a galaxy of gold above the arena. He bowed with the others, hand pressed to his chest, breath measured, expression flawless. Years of discipline held him upright, years of fear hollowed him out. He did not look at Jimin. Not when their shoulders brushed. Not when Jimin's fingers lingered half a second too long at his wrist. Not when he felt that familiar pull, warm, terrifying, impossible to ignore. Backstage swallowed them in darkness and chaos. Managers shouted cues, stylists rushed forward with towels, cameras faded, the roar of the crowd became a distant ocean. Jungkook slipped away. No one stopped him, they rarely did. The golden boy needed space, they said, the prodigy needed air. The dressing room door slammed shut behind him, the echo sharp as a gunshot. Silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The room smelled of hairspray, fabric softener, and something faintly antiseptic. His reflection stared back at him from the mirror, sweat-slicked hair clinging to his forehead, eyeliner smudged at the corners, lips still curved in a ghost of the smile he had worn for the world. His chest hitched. Once, twice. Then the dam broke. He doubled over, palms braced against the vanity, shoulders shaking as soundless sobs tore through him. Tears dripped onto the polished surface, blurring the reflection of the person he no longer recognized. I did everything right, he whispered to the empty room. Why does it still feel like I'm disappearing? He pressed his fist against his mouth to muffle the sound, as if even the walls might betray him. Outside, footsteps passed, laughter, a distant call for water bottles. Life moved on. Inside, time stalled. He sank to the floor, back against the cold cabinet, knees pulled to his chest. The fabric of his stage outfit scratched against his skin. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, too loud, too fast. He thought of the cameras, of the headlines, of the fans who believed his smile was real. And he thought of Jimin, of the way Jimin used to look at him before the world learned to look first. The door handle rattled. Jungkook froze. He scrubbed at his face with the heel of his hand, smearing eyeliner further, breath caught halfway between panic and denial. A soft knock. Jungkook, Jimin's voice, gentle and careful, threaded through the door like light through a crack. It's me. Silence pressed in. Jungkook stared at the door as if it might vanish if he refused to acknowledge it. Another knock, quieter this time. You left before the encore briefing. Everyone's looking for you. I was worried. The word worried landed like a stone in Jungkook's chest. He should stay silent. He should fix his face, open the door, pretend. He had built a career on pretending. But his hand betrayed him, rising, trembling, unlocking the door. Jimin slipped inside and closed it gently behind him, shutting out the hallway noise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jimin took in the scene, the discarded microphone pack on the table, the damp tissues, the boy curled on the floor trying to look smaller than he was. His expression didn't change into shock or pity. It softened, the way it always did when he looked at Jungkook, as if the world narrowed to a single fragile truth. You're hurt, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook let out a humorless breath. I wish it were that simple. Jimin crossed the room and crouched in front of him, close enough that Jungkook could see the fine tremor in his hands. He smelled faintly of citrus body spray and stage smoke. Familiar, dangerous. "You didn't look at me out there," Jimin said. "I couldn't." The confession slipped out before Jungkook could stop it. Jimin's brows knit together. "Why?" "Because if I did, I would have run to you. Because if I did, the world would have seen what I can't afford to lose. Because loving you feels like holding water in my hands while everyone watches it spill away." Jungkook swallowed hard because the cameras were everywhere. "They're always everywhere." "Exactly." The word cracked. Jimin sat back on his heels, absorbing the weight behind it. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the space between them. "You think they'll take something from you," Jimin said slowly. Jungkook laughed, a fragile sound. "They already have." A long silence followed, thick with everything unsaid. Jimin reached out, then hesitated, his hand hovering in the air before gently resting on Jungkook's knee. The touch was light, tentative, as if asking permission. Jungkook didn't pull away. "I miss you," Jimin whispered, "even when you're right next to me." The words struck deeper than any accusation. Jungkook's vision blurred again. "I'm still here." "Are you?" He wanted to say yes, he wanted to believe it. Instead, he stared at the floor. "I'm whatever they need me to be." "And what do you need?" Jimin asked. The question felt foreign, like a language he had forgotten how to speak. Jungkook's hands curled into the fabric at his knees. "I need," his voice faltered, "I need the world to stop watching for just 1 minute." Jimin's grip tightened slightly, "Then let it watch me instead." Jungkook looked up, startled. Jimin's eyes were steady, resolute, and unbearably tender. "You don't have to carry everything alone. You never did." A tear slipped down Jungkook's cheek before he could stop it. "I'm afraid," he admitted, the words raw, stripped of pretense. "I'm afraid the world took you from me." The confession hung in the air, fragile as glass. Jimin inhaled sharply. For a heartbeat, pain flickered across his face, quick, bright, and gone. He shifted closer until their shoulders touched, grounding, real. "The world doesn't get to decide that," Jimin said softly. "We do." Outside, the muffled call for places echoed through the hallway. The encore was minutes away. Inside the dressing room, time resumed its slow, inevitable march. Jungkook closed his eyes, leaning into the warmth at his side, unsure whether he was finding strength or losing the last of his defenses. The stage awaited, the cameras waited, the world waited. But for the first time that night, he allowed himself to breathe. And beside him, Jimin stayed. The hallway lights felt harsher after the quiet of the dressing room, as if the world had turned the brightness up to punish them for lingering too long in the shadows. "Places in 2 minutes," a stage manager shouted, voice ricocheting off concrete walls. Jungkook's pulse spiked again, the fragile calm he'd found beside Jimin already splintering. He adjusted his in-ear monitor with shaking fingers, avoiding the mirrors that lined the corridor like silent judges. Jimin walked beside him, close but not touching, their shoulders nearly brushing with every step. The distance was deliberate, necessary, torture. "You don't have to go back out if you can't," Jimin murmured, so softly that the words dissolved into the hum of the ventilation system. Jungkook let out a breath that tasted like metal. "I always go back out." "That's not what I asked." Jungkook stopped walking. Crew members rushed around them, too busy to notice the stillness forming in the current of motion. A lighting technician nearly collided with Jungkook and muttered an apology before hurrying on. The world kept spinning. Jungkook turned to Jimin, eyes sharp, wounded. "If I stop now, everything I've built collapses. Do you understand that?" Jimin didn't flinch. "And if you keep going like this, you collapse." The words landed harder than any scream from the crowd. For a moment, Jungkook's carefully constructed composure cracked wide open, revealing something volatile beneath. "You think I don't know that?" he snapped, voice low but burning. "You think I don't feel it every time I smile like nothing's wrong?" Jimin's jaw tightened, then stop pretending with me. A beat of silence, electric, dangerous. I'm not pretending with you, Jungkook said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Jimin stepped closer, closing the gap they had been carefully maintaining. You didn't even look at me on stage. I told you why. No, Jimin shot back, eyes flashing. You told me about cameras. You didn't tell me why you're acting like I'm already gone. The accusation hung between them, raw and exposed. Jungkook's chest rose and fell rapidly. The noise of the arena seeped through the walls, a living, breathing entity demanding their return. You want the truth, Jungkook whispered. Yes. You're slipping away, Jungkook said, the words breaking free like a dam bursting. Not because you want to, but because they want more of you. More interviews, more solo shoots, more time apart. Every schedule they hand us feels like a map of how to separate us piece by piece. Jimin stared at him, stunned. You think I'm choosing that? I think you don't see what it's doing to us. The shout was louder than Jungkook intended. A nearby stylist glanced over, startled, then quickly looked away, pretending not to hear. Jimin's voice dropped, trembling with restrained emotion. I see it, I feel it every day, but I thought we were strong enough. Jungkook laughed bitterly. Strong enough for what? For headlines that dissect every glance we share. For fans who ship us like characters and critics who tear us apart when we breathe wrong. For management meetings where they talk about image control like our lives are a brand strategy. Jimin's eyes glistened. We knew what this was when we started. We were kids, Jungkook shot back. We didn't know what it would cost. The call for encore echoed again, louder, more urgent. Jimin grabbed Jungkook's wrist before he could turn away. The contact was firm, grounding, impossible to ignore. Don't run from me, Jimin said. I'm running toward the stage, Jungkook replied, but he didn't pull free. Same thing, Jimin whispered. Their gazes locked, years of shared history flickering in the space between heartbeats, late-night rehearsals, stolen laughter in hotel rooms, silent support during injuries, the comfort of presence when words failed. Jungkook's voice softened, fraying at the edges. When you stood under the spotlight alone last week and they called it your breakout moment, everyone cheered. I did too, but all I could think was, what if this is how it starts? What if one day you don't need me beside you anymore? Jimin's grip tightened. I have never needed anyone the way I need you. Need changes, Jungkook said, barely audible. Jimin shook his head, frustration flaring. You're scared of something that hasn't happened. I'm scared because it could. The honesty in Jungkook's voice stripped the argument of its armor, leaving only fear behind. A staff member rounded the corner. You too, we are live in 30 seconds. They didn't move. The staff member hesitated, sensing the charged air, then retreated with an awkward nod. Jimin stepped even closer, so near that Jungkook could feel the warmth of his breath. Look at me, he said. Jungkook did. Do you really believe the world can take me from you? Jimin asked. Jungkook's throat tightened. It already tries every day. Then let it try, Jimin said, voice fierce despite its softness. Because I'm still here, I'm choosing to be here. The words struck deep, but doubt lingered like a shadow. You say that now, Jungkook whispered. Jimin's expression shifted, hurt giving way to something sharper, more desperate. What do I have to do to make you believe me? Jungkook opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no contract, no promise strong enough to compete with the machinery of fame. Before he could answer, a thunderous swell of cheers erupted from the arena, the cue for their return. The sound vibrated through the floor, up their legs, into their chests. Time was up. Jimin released his wrist slowly, fingers trailing against Jungkook's skin like a question left unanswered. We finish this after the show, he said. Jungkook nodded, though his stomach twisted at the thought of what finish might mean. They walked toward the stage entrance together, the roar growing louder with each step. Colored lights flickered across the curtains, painting their faces in shifting blues and reds. Just before they stepped into the blinding glow, Jimin leaned in and said, "If you disappear, I'll come find you, no matter where the world hides you." The promise lodged itself in Jungkook's chest, heavy and luminous. They stepped onto the stage. The crowd exploded into sound, cameras surged forward, the performance swallowed them whole. Jungkook sang, he danced, he smiled. And for the first time, every note felt like both a declaration and a plea, an attempt to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. Across the stage, Jimin met his eyes. This time, Jungkook didn't look away. But the fear remained, coiled beneath the music, waiting for the moment the lights would dim and the world would once again demand its price. "Don't touch him like that." The words were low, sharp, and unmistakably angry, spoken not into a microphone, not for fans, but into the narrow space behind the stage where shadows clung to every corner. Jungkook froze mid-step. Jimin's hand was still resting lightly on his lower back, getting him through the crush of crew members and equipment cases. It had been instinctive, protective, something he'd done 1,000 times without thinking. Now it felt like a crime scene. A senior manager stood a few feet away, tablet clutched to his chest like a shield, his expression tight with forced professionalism. Two stylists pretended to organize costume racks nearby, their ears tilted toward the confrontation. "We are live on multiple feeds tonight," the manager continued, voice controlled but seething beneath the surface. "There are angles we can't control, interpretations we can't afford." Jimin's hand dropped slowly from Jungkook's back, fingers curling into his palm. "He almost tripped over a cable," he said evenly. "I was helping." "You were lingering." The accusation cut through the air. Jungkook's pulse thundered in his ears. The echo of the crowd still rang through the corridors, but here, in this pocket of tension, the world narrowed to a single unbearable truth. They were being watched even when the cameras were gone. "We've had discussions about boundaries," the manager went on, lowering his voice. "Fan speculation is at an all-time high. Certain narratives are gaining traction internationally. Sponsors are asking questions." Jimin's jaw flexed. "We're not narratives, we are people." "Your assets," the manager replied too quickly. He caught himself, exhaled. "Your global figures, every gesture is magnified. You cannot afford ambiguity." The word ambiguity hung like a threat. Jungkook found his voice, though it felt like dragging glass across his throat. "Are you saying we can't even touch each other now?" "I'm saying you need to be mindful," the manager said. "There's a difference between camaraderie and implication." Silence detonated between them. Jimin took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Jungkook without realizing it. "What exactly are you implying?" The manager hesitated, eyes flicking toward the stylists, the hallway, the invisible network of eyes and ears that fed the rumor mills of the world. "I'm saying that perception becomes reality in this industry." Jungkook let out a hollow laugh. "So we're guilty of whatever people imagine. You're responsible for what you encourage." The words hit harder than any headline. Jimin's voice dropped to a dangerous softness. "And what if what people imagine is just two people caring about each other?" The manager's expression hardened. "Then you make sure they imagine something else." A beat passed, heavy, suffocating. Jungkook felt something inside him twist, anger, humiliation, grief, all tangled together. He thought of the dressing room, of his confession, of the fragile promise Jimin had made minutes before stepping back into the spotlight. He thought of the cost. "Understood," Jungkook said quietly. Jimin turned to him, eyes flashing. "No, not understood." "Jimin," Jungkook warned under his breath. "No," Jimin repeated, louder now. "I'm tired of pretending that caring is a liability." The stylists stopped, pretending not to listen. The manager's voice sharpened. "Lower your voice." "Or what?" Jimin shot back. "You'll fine me, suspend me, issue a statement about exhaustion. while you erase every part of me that doesn't fit the brand. Jungkook grabbed Jimin's arm. Stop. But Jimin was shaking, not with fear, but with a fury born of years of swallowed words. We trained together, we bled together, we built this together, and now you're telling us that a hand on his back is a threat to the company. It's a threat to stability, the manager snapped. Do you have any idea how fragile public favor is? One misinterpreted moment can cost millions. And what does it cost us? Jimin demanded. Have you calculated that? The question landed like a slap. Jungkook tightened his grip on Jimin's arm, voice barely audible. Please, not here. Jimin's chest heaved. For a moment, it seemed he might continue, might burn everything down in a single, incandescent outburst. Then he looked at Jungkook. Really looked. At the fear etched into the younger man's face, at the plea in his eyes, at the exhaustion that no amount of makeup could conceal. Jimin's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him, leaving behind something more dangerous, quiet defiance. We'll be mindful, he said at last, each word carved from stone. The manager nodded, relief flickering across his features. Good, there's a press interaction after the encore, keep it professional. He turned and walked away, already typing notes into his tablet. The stylists resumed their tasks with exaggerated focus, the moment dissolving into the machinery of backstage routine. But the damage lingered. Jungkook released Jimin's arm slowly. You shouldn't have done that. Jimin let out a bitter breath. Someone had to say it. They'll watch you even more now. They already do. Jungkook ran a hand through his damp hair, frustration simmering beneath his skin. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Jimin's gaze softened, though the embers of anger still glowed. Afraid that I'd fight for us. Afraid that the world would punish you for it, Jungkook said. The honesty in his voice stole the last of Jimin's retorts. For a moment they stood in the corridor's half-light, the distant roar of fans muffled by concrete and steel. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and something faintly electrical, like a storm waiting to break. Jimin spoke first, quieter now. Do you regret it? Regret what? What? The single syllable held years of history. Jungkook's eyes widened. Don't do that. Answer me. Jungkook's throat tightened. He thought of every late-night conversation, every shared silence, every unspoken understanding that had carried them through the darkest stretches of their lives. I regret that the world makes it feel impossible, he said finally. I regret that loving you feels like a risk assessment. Jimin's breath hitched. But I don't regret you, Jungkook added, voice breaking. Never you. The words hung between them, fragile and incandescent. Footsteps approached from down the hall, security, calling for them to move to the press area. Jimin wiped quickly at his eyes, frustration flashing at the moisture there. We don't have time to fall apart. We never do, Jungkook said. They walked toward the press room together, the distance between them carefully measured now, every step a performance within a performance. The press area was a blaze of camera flashes and overlapping questions. Reporters leaned forward, voices sharp with curiosity. Jungkook, how do you feel about tonight's record-breaking attendance? Jimin, there's been a lot of talk about your solo activities. Are you considering focusing on individual promotions? The questions came like bullets. Jungkook slipped into his public smile, the one that had carried him across continents. We are grateful, he said smoothly. Tonight was about the fans who have supported us from the beginning. Jimin nodded, composure restored with frightening speed. As for solo activities, everything I do reflects the team. We grow individually so we can return stronger together. A reporter in the second row raised her hand. There's a perception that the group dynamic has shifted recently. Some fans are worried about growing distance between members. Would you like to address that? The room stilled. Jungkook felt Jimin go rigid beside him. Cameras zoomed in. This was the moment management feared, the moment narratives were born. Jungkook glanced at Jimin just for a fraction of a second. In that glance lived fear, defiance, love, and the unbearable weight of being seen. Jimin met his eyes. And then, deliberately, Jimin reached across the narrow space between them and took Jungkook's hand. The room erupted, gasps, frantic shutter clicks, murmurs swelling into a tidal wave of speculation. Jungkook's breath caught, heat flooded his face, every instinct screamed at him to pull away. Jimin's grip tightened, steady and warm. "We are right here," Jimin said into the sea of microphones, voice calm, unwavering, closer than ever. The words detonated across the room. Somewhere, a manager swore under his breath, a publicist dropped her clipboard. A dozen headlines were born in the span of a heartbeat. Jungkook's heart pounded so hard he thought it might shatter his ribs. Fear surged, of consequences, of backlash, of the machinery that would grind into motion the second they left this room. But beneath the fear, something else rose. Relief. His fingers curled around Jimin's. The flashes intensified, turning the moment into a stuttering, blinding storm of light. And for the first time since the world had begun to pull them apart, Jungkook did not feel like he was losing him to it. "Have you lost your minds?" The door slammed so hard the walls trembled, the echo rattling the glass water bottles on the conference table. The air inside the private meeting room felt vacuum-sealed, stripped of oxygen, leaving only the metallic taste of panic. Jungkook's hand was still tingling. Even now, minutes after the press interaction, he could feel the phantom warmth of Jimin's fingers interlaced with his, the memory replaying in brutal slow motion alongside the explosion of camera flashes and stunned gasps. Jimin stood across from the long table, shoulders squared, chin lifted, not defiant, not apologetic, simply unyielding. His stage makeup had begun to fade at the edges, revealing the exhaustion beneath. The head manager paced like a storm contained in human form. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he demanded, voice cracking under the strain of restraint. That was not a misunderstanding. That was not a rumor. That was a statement. Jimin's voice was steady. It was the truth. "The truth doesn't trend globally in under 60 seconds. The manager snapped, slamming his tablet onto the table. The screen lit up with a cascade of notifications, hashtags, breaking alerts, live reaction feeds multiplying by the second. Jungkook's gaze fell on the screen despite himself. Clips LOOPED, their hands clasped, Jimin's words, his own stunned expression. HADLINES, DRFTD in real time. Are they confirming? Fans divided over shocking moment. Brand risk or bold honesty? His stomach lurched. "We can still contain this," a public relations director said, voice thin with urgency. "If we release a clarification, frame it as reassurance to fans about group unity." "It wasn't about group unity," Jimin said. The room went still. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. "Not here, not like this." The director's lips pressed into a tight line. "Then what was it about?" Jimin didn't hesitate. "About refusing to act like caring about someone is a scandal." A stunned silence followed, thick enough to choke on. Jungkook felt every gaze in the room swing toward them, not as performers, not as brand ambassadors, but as problems to be solved. The head manager turned to Jungkook. "And you," he asked, voice deceptively calm, "do you share that sentiment?" The question felt like a blade poised at his throat. Jungkook's mind raced. Contracts, years of training, the members, the fans who saw him as a symbol of hope, the staff whose livelihoods were tied to the group's stability. He thought of the dressing room, of Jimin's quiet promise, of the terror of losing him piece by piece. He swallowed. "I think we're human." It wasn't a denial. It wasn't a confirmation. It was enough to make the room exhale in frustrated disbelief. "You're not just human," the manager said. Your symbols, investments, you carry an entire ecosystem on your shoulders. One misstep. One honest moment, Jimin corrected. The manager's composure cracked. Honesty doesn't pay the penalties when sponsors pull out. Jungkook flinched. The word penalties echoed in his chest like a countdown. Jimin's expression flickered, pain, anger, and something dangerously close to guilt. So we're supposed to lie forever. You're supposed to be strategic, the director interjected. There are ways to express closeness without inviting speculation. Speculation exists because people see what's already there, Jimin said quietly. The truth in his voice made Jungkook's heart stutter. The manager leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Listen carefully. If this narrative escalates, it will not just affect you, it will affect the entire group. Endorsements, broadcast opportunities, international partnerships. We cannot afford controversy of this magnitude. Jungkook felt the weight settle on his shoulders like a physical burden, not just his career, everyone. Jimin turned to him then, and for the first time since the press room, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Say something, he urged softly, not for them, for us. The room seemed to tilt. Jungkook's chest tightened. I am saying something, he replied, voice strained. I'm trying to keep everything from collapsing. And what if keeping everything means losing yourself? Jimin asked. The question hit with surgical precision. Jungkook's hands curled into fists at his sides. You think I don't feel that happening already? Silence fell, stunned and raw. The manager looked between them, realization dawning with cold clarity. This is exactly what we feared, he murmured. Emotional entanglement compromising professional judgment. Jimin let out a bitter laugh. You make it sound like a disease. In this industry, it can be, the manager replied. The words landed like a verdict. Jungkook's vision blurred at the edges. The room felt too small, the air too thin. What do you want us to do? He asked hoarsely. The answer came without hesitation. Distance, the manager said. Publicly and privately, no more ambiguous interactions, no more unscripted moments. We issue a statement reframing today as a gesture of team solidarity. You both focus on separate schedules for the next quarter. The floor seemed to vanish beneath Jungkook's feet. Separate. Jimin's voice dropped to a whisper. You're asking us to disappear from each other. I'm asking you to protect what you've built, the manager said. Jungkook stared at the table, the wood grain swimming before his eyes. Protect what you've built, at what cost? Jimin turned to him fully now. Do you agree to this? The question was soft, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid fears. Jungkook's throat closed. Images flashed through his mind. Empty hotel rooms, missed calls, stages where their choreography no longer aligned, interviews where they spoke about each other in past tense. His voice faltered. The manager seized the hesitation. This is temporary, a strategic recalibration. You're professionals, you understand sacrifice. Jimin's gaze never left Jungkook's face. Look at me, he whispered. Jungkook forced himself to meet his eyes. There was no anger there now, only vulnerability and something else, fear that mirrored his own. If we do this, Jimin said, barely audible, promise me we won't become strangers. The plea shattered something inside Jungkook. I don't know how to promise that, he admitted. The room fell into a stunned hush. The manager exhaled sharply. We're not discussing personal promises, we're discussing operational necessity. Jimin straightened, something resolute settling into his posture. No, he said, you're discussing control. Jimin, Jungkook began. No, Jimin repeated, louder now. They want us to shrink until we fit into a version of ourselves that's easy to market. They want us to pretend the most human parts of us don't exist. They want us to survive, Jungkook said, the words breaking out of him. Do you think I'm not terrified, not of headlines, of losing everything we've worked for, of being the reason everyone else pays the price? Jimin's expression softened, the fight draining into sorrow. I never wanted you to carry that alone. Then stop making it heavier, Jungkook whispered. The words hung between them, sharp and irreversible. Jimin recoiled slightly, as if struck. Is that what I'm doing? Jungkook's chest heaved. When you force moments like that, when you make declarations without knowing if I can survive the fallout, you take away my choice. The confession stunned even him. Jimin's eyes widened, hurt flaring bright and immediate. I thought I was giving you courage. You were giving the world ammunition, Jungkook said, voice trembling. Silence collapsed over the room, suffocating and absolute. The manager cleared his throat, sensing an opening. We will proceed with the distancing strategy. Statements will be drafted within the hour. Jimin didn't look at him. His gaze remained locked on Jungkook, searching for something that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. So that's it, Jimin asked quietly. We let them rewrite us. Jungkook's vision blurred again. We survive, he said, and maybe later we figure out what's left. Jimin's lips parted, but no sound came out. The distance between them, only a few feet, felt suddenly immeasurable. Outside the conference room, the muffled roar of fans still echoed through the building, oblivious to the fracture forming behind closed doors. Jimin took a step back. Then another. Each movement was small, controlled, devastating. Okay, he said at last, voice hollow, we survive. The words sounded like surrender. Jungkook watched him turn away, watched the line of his shoulders stiffen as he walked toward the door, watched the moment something fragile and luminous between them dimmed under the weight of strategy and fear. The door closed softly behind him. And in the silence that followed, Jungkook realized survival had never felt so much like loss. The silence in Jungkook's hotel suite was louder than any stadium. He stood in the center of the room, still in his stage clothes, the city lights of Tokyo, or Seoul, or Los Angeles. The locations blurred together now, bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows like 1,000 indifferent eyes. His phone lay on the glass table in front of him, vibrating every few seconds with notifications he couldn't bring himself to read. Trending worldwide. Debates. Edits. Slow-motion clips of hands entwined, replayed like evidence in a trial. He didn't need to look. He already knew the verdict. Spectacle. Jungkook dragged a hand down his face and finally sank onto the couch. The leather creaked beneath him. The room smelled faintly of expensive detergent and stale air conditioning, sterile, impersonal, temporary, like every place he'd slept in for the past decade. His phone buzzed again. This time he picked it up. Dozens of messages, group chats exploding, links, warnings, half-formed reassurances. One message sat pinned at the top, unread. Jimin. His thumb hovered over it, trembling. The last time they had spoken face-to-face, the word survive had sounded like a eulogy. He opened the message. We need to talk, not as idols, as us. Jungkook's chest tightened. He stared at the words until they blurred, until they felt less like text and more like a hand reaching through the screen. A knock sounded at the door. He froze. Another knock, firmer this time. Jungkook, came Jimin's voice from the hallway, low and strained. I know you're in there. His pulse spiked. The managers had arranged separate floors, separate schedules, separate cars, distance measured in logistics. Jimin had crossed all of it. Jungkook stood slowly, his legs unsteady. Every step toward the door felt like walking toward a decision he wasn't ready to make. He opened it. Jimin stood there, hair still damp from a rushed shower, hoodie pulled over plain t-shirt, eyes rimmed red but blazing with purpose. He looked less like a global star and more like the boy Jungkook had met years ago, stubborn, luminous, impossible to ignore. You shouldn't be here, Jungkook said, though he stepped aside to let him in. Neither should you, Jimin replied, entering the room, not alone with all that noise. The door clicked shut behind them. For a moment, they simply stood there, the city lights painting fractured reflections across the walls. The distance between them felt heavier than any argument. Jungkook spoke first. "They'll know you came." "I didn't tell anyone." "That's worse." Jimin's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to talk about them." "Everything is about them," Jungkook shot back. "Sponsors, contracts, the statement they're drafting right now to explain away what you did." "What we did," Jimin corrected. Jungkook's laugh was sharp, humorless. "You grabbed my hand in a room full of cameras. And you didn't let go." The truth landed between them, undeniable. Jungkook turned away, running both hands through his hair. "You forced a moment I wasn't ready for." "I forced honesty," Jimin said, stepping closer, "because you were drowning in pretending." Jungkook spun back, anger flaring. "You think that was for me? That was for you. You needed to prove something to them, to yourself." "I needed to prove that you're not alone," Jimin snapped, voice breaking, "because you've been acting like you are for months." The accusation hit its mark. Jungkook's breath came fast, shallow. "I am alone," he whispered. "Up there, under those lights, with millions of people watching for the smallest crack, I'm alone." Jimin's expression shattered. "You were never supposed to be." But that's what this life does." Jungkook's voice rose, raw and uncontrolled. "It isolates you, turns you into something consumable, something people feel entitled to dissect. And the moment they suspect you're human in ways they didn't script for you, they turn." Jimin took another step closer. "So we hide forever." "So we survive," Jungkook said, the word tasting like ash. Jimin shook his head slowly. "You keep saying that like survival is enough." "It has to be." "Why?" Jimin demanded. "Because they told you it was." "Because I've seen what happens when people stop being what the world wants." Jungkook's voice cracked, years of buried fear spilling out. "Careers vanish, contracts evaporate, fans feel betrayed, and the people you love get dragged through hell for something they never asked for." Jimin went still. "You think I didn't ask for this?" The question hung, fragile and explosive. Jungkook faltered. "That's not what I meant." "It is," Jimin said quietly. "You think I stumbled into loving you by accident, like it was some unavoidable hazard of proximity." The word loving detonated in the room. Jungkook's heart slammed against his ribs. He stared at Jimin, the confession reverberating through every memory they shared. Jimin's eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. "I chose you," he said, "every day, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was terrifying, even when I knew the world would never make space for it." Jungkook's vision blurred. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Say it out loud." Jimin's voice trembled, anger and grief intertwined. "We've spent years speaking in half sentences and glances. I'm tired, Jungkook. I'm tired of loving you like it's a secret I have to apologize for." The air left Jungkook's lungs in a rush. "You think I'm not tired?" he whispered. "You think it doesn't tear me apart every time I have to pretend your touch is nothing? Every time I have to measure how long I look at you because someone might freeze frame it and decide it means too much?" "Then stop measuring," Jimin said. "I can't," Jungkook's voice broke completely, "because the moment I stop, everything we've built could collapse. And if it collapses, it won't just be us under the rubble." Jimin's shoulders sagged, the fight draining into something quieter and more devastating. "So what are we then?" he asked. "A liability, a risk factor?" Jungkook closed his eyes. "We're complicated." Jimin let out a hollow laugh. "Complicated is what people say when they're too afraid to name something." Silence settled, thick with unshed words. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Neon lights flickered across Jimin's face, painting him in shifting colors, blue, then red, then a stark, unforgiving white. "I read the draft statement," Jimin said after a moment, voice flat. Jungkook's eyes snapped open. "You what?" "They sent it to me for approval." Jimin's lips curled bitterly. "It says the hand-holding was a spontaneous gesture of gratitude, symbolizing unity and brotherhood." The word brotherhood felt like a blade. Jungkook's stomach twisted. It's damage control. It's erasure, Jimin said. They're trying to protect us. They're trying to make us palatable. Jungkook's voice softened, exhaustion bleeding through. Maybe that's the only way we get to stay. Jimin looked at him for a long time, searching his face, as if trying to memorize it before it changed. And if staying means we lose the one thing that made all of this worth it. Jungkook's throat tightened. Don't make me choose. I'm not, Jimin said. The world is, and you're letting it. The words struck deep, echoing in the hollow spaces Jungkook had been trying to ignore. Jungkook took a shaky step forward. What do you want from me? Jimin's answer came without hesitation. Honesty, even if it's ugly, even if it scares you. Jungkook's chest rose and fell rapidly. I'm terrified that one day you'll resent me, he admitted, for choosing caution, for choosing survival over us. Jimin's expression softened, grief replacing anger. I'm terrified you'll disappear, he whispered, not from the world, from yourself. The confession settled between them like fragile glass. Jungkook reached out before he could stop himself, fingers brushing Jimin's sleeve. The contact was tentative, electric. I don't know how to do this, he said. Neither do I, Jimin replied. For the first time that night, there was no argument in the space between them, only two people standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. Jimin's voice dropped to a whisper. If we have to pretend for them, promise me we won't start pretending with each other. Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. I promise. The word felt both sacred and insufficient. A sudden buzz shattered the moment. Jungkook's phone lit up on the table, screen glowing with a single notification. Emergency meeting, 15 minutes. All members required. Jimin saw it, his jaw tightened. They're moving fast. They always do, Jungkook said. The fragile quiet between them began to fracture under the weight of what was coming next. Statements, strategies, consequences neither of them could fully predict. Jimin stepped back toward the door, his expression resolute but haunted. This isn't over. Jungkook's voice was barely audible. It never was. Jimin opened the door, then paused, hand on the frame. Without turning around, he said, for what it's worth, I don't regret today. The door closed behind him before Jungkook could answer. Left alone with the city lights and the echo of everything unsaid, Jungkook sank back onto the couch, his promise to Jimin ringing in his ears, honesty, even when it was ugly. In the silence, he realized the truth they were both circling. The world hadn't taken Jimin from him yet. But it was already deciding the price. No statements, no apologies, not until we decide what we are protecting. The room fell into stunned silence the moment Jungkook spoke. It was the emergency meeting, every member present, managers lining the walls like silent jurors, legal advisors on speakerphone, the air thick with caffeine, stress, and the faint hum of devices recording every word for documentation. Jungkook hadn't planned to speak first. But something in him, something worn thin by fear and sharpened by Jimin's confession, had finally snapped. Across the table, Jimin's head lifted slowly, surprise flickering across his face before it hardened into something steadier. Not relief, not yet, but recognition. The head manager pressed his fingers to his temple. We are not debating whether to issue a statement. We are determining the wording. We are determining whether the wording erases us, Jimin said quietly. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. One of the other members shifted in his seat, glancing between them. Hyung, maybe we should just clarify things before rumors get worse. Jungkook's chest tightened. This was what he had feared most, not headlines, not sponsors, but collateral damage, their family caught in the blast radius. I don't want you dragged into this, he said, voice softer now, any of you. We are already in it, another member replied gently, we always have been. The truth of that settled heavily over the table. The legal advisor's voice crackled through the speaker. From a liability standpoint, ambiguity increases risk. Market confidence depends on stability. We strongly recommend a unifying narrative. A unifying narrative, Jimin repeated, the words tasting like poison. That's a beautiful way to say lie convincingly. Watch your tone, the manager warned. No, Jimin said, louder now. Watch the situation. We're not talking about a scandal. We're talking about two people being treated like a crisis because they didn't act like strangers. A younger manager spoke up cautiously. It's not about strangers, it's about perception. The parasocial dynamic is delicate. Fans project. They project because they care, Jungkook interrupted, because we invited them into our lives. We told them to find comfort in our bond, in our honesty, and now we're punishing them for believing us. The room went still. Jimin stared at him, something fierce and proud igniting in his eyes. The head manager's voice hardened. This is not a philosophical discussion, this is business. It stopped being just business the moment you told us to erase our humanity, Jimin shot back. Enough, the manager snapped. Do you think you're the first artists to face this? Do you think every public figure doesn't sacrifice parts of themselves? This is the price of global influence. Jungkook's hands trembled under the table. Who decides which parts we sacrifice? We do, the manager said. No, Jungkook replied, voice barely above a whisper. You recommend, we pay. The words hit harder than any shout. Silence spread, heavy and absolute. One of the members leaned forward, elbows on the table. Let's stop talking like this is only about image, he said quietly. This is about you too, and whether you're okay. The question lingered, fragile and terrifying. Jimin let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his lungs for years. I'm not okay, he admitted. I'm tired of loving someone like it's a liability report. No one spoke. Jungkook stared at the table, the grain of the wood swimming in his vision. His pulse thundered in his ears. I'm not okay either, he said. The confession cracked something open in the room. Fear, empathy, shock, all colliding at once. The head manager's expression faltered for the first time. This is bigger than we anticipated. Yes, Jimin said, it is. The legal advisor cleared his throat. If there is an undisclosed personal relationship that could affect contractual obligations. There isn't, Jungkook said quickly, the word automatic, defensive. Jimin turned to him slowly. The denial hung in the air like smoke. Jungkook's chest tightened. He could feel every gaze in the room, every expectation, every consequence waiting for him to choose the safer lie. His voice faltered. There isn't anything defined. The truth was messier, harder, impossible to package into a statement. Jimin looked away, pain flashing across his face before he masked it. One of the members spoke carefully. Maybe we don't need definitions right now. Maybe we need boundaries that don't destroy you. The manager seized on that. Exactly, professional boundaries. Not emotional exile, Jimin cut in. Jungkook's voice trembled. They want distance. And you, Jimin asked. The question felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. I want to breathe, Jungkook said, without feeling like every inhale is a negotiation. The room fell silent again. The youngest member spoke hesitantly. If you pretend nothing happened, people will notice. If you confirm anything, it becomes a global debate. Either way, you're trapped. Jimin let out a quiet, humorless laugh. So the choice is between a cage and a glass box. Jungkook looked at him. At least in a glass box, we can still see each other. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Jimin's breath caught. The manager pinched the bridge of his nose. We are losing focus. The immediate issue is public response. Jungkook straightened in his chair. His fear was still there, loud, relentless, but beneath it, something steadier had begun to take root. Not courage, not yet, but refusal. No lies, he said. The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water. The manager stared at him. "Excuse me." "We don't lie," Jungkook repeated, voice shaking but firm. "We can be vague, we can be private, but we don't erase what's real just because it's inconvenient." Jimin's eyes filled with something dangerously close to hope. The legal advisor interjected, alarmed. "Ambiguity without denial will fuel speculation." "Speculation already exists," Jimin said. "Lies just make it uglier." The room buzzed with tension. The head manager leaned forward, studying Jungkook as if seeing him for the first time. "You're willing to risk everything on this?" Jungkook swallowed. "I'm risking everything by existing like this." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, one of the members nodded. "If we built our career on authenticity, maybe we shouldn't abandon it when it becomes uncomfortable." Another nodded slowly. "Fans can handle truth better than betrayal." The manager looked around the table, realizing the ground beneath his authority was shifting. "This could cost us," he said quietly. Jimin met his gaze. "So does pretending we're not human." A long pause followed. Finally, the manager exhaled, the sound heavy with reluctant concession. "We will draft a statement emphasizing privacy, mutual support, and the complexity of personal bonds. No denials, no confirmations." Relief and dread collided in Jungkook's chest. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't erasure. Jimin's shoulders lowered a fraction, tension easing just enough to reveal the exhaustion beneath. He glanced at Jungkook, their eyes meeting across the table, fear still there, but also something fragile and unbroken. The meeting dissolved into logistics, phrasing, timelines, voices blurred into background noise. Jungkook barely heard any of it. All he could hear was the echo of Jimin's earlier words, "I chose you." When the meeting finally adjourned, chairs scraped back, papers shuffled, and the room began to empty. Jungkook remained seated. Jimin hesitated by the door, waiting. The last manager left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than the earlier slam. Silence. Jungkook stood slowly. His legs felt unsteady, as if he'd just stepped off a cliff and somehow survived the fall. "We didn't lie," Jimin said, voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook nodded. "We didn't tell the whole truth either." "Maybe that's ours to keep," Jimin replied. They stood a few feet apart, the distance charged with everything they still didn't know how to say. Jungkook's voice trembled. "When you said you chose me, did you mean it like?" "Yes," Jimin said, cutting him off gently. "I meant it exactly the way you're afraid to ask." The room seemed to tilt. Jungkook's heart pounded so loudly he was sure Jimin could hear it. "I'm still afraid," he admitted. "So am I," Jimin said, "but fear isn't the same as regret." The words settled into Jungkook's chest, heavy and warm. He took a step forward. Then another. The distance between them shrank to inches, the air electric, fragile, real. Jungkook's voice was barely a breath. "If the world turns on us." Jimin's reply was immediate. Then we turned toward each other. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jungkook let himself believe that might be enough. Outside, the world was already reacting, already dissecting, already deciding. Inside the quiet room, they stood on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful, no longer pretending it wasn't there. The statement went live at 0900. Jungkook watched the numbers climb in real time, views, shares, comments multiplying faster than he could process. The screen of his phone glowed against the dim hotel room, the official wording staring back at him like a carefully constructed mask. "We value our members' deep bonds and ask for respect regarding their private relationships. Our priority remains the music and the fans who make everything possible. No lies. No confirmations. No erasure." And somehow, it felt more exposing than a confession. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Notifications stacked over each other, fragments of global reaction bleeding through. Some messages were tender. Some were furious. Some demanded answers he didn't have. He locked the screen and dropped the phone onto the bed as if it might burn him. A soft knock sounded at the adjoining door. Jimin. The hotel had assigned them separate rooms but a shared suite, an irony no one had acknowledged. Distance, with a door in between, privacy measured in hinges and locks. Jungkook opened it. Jimin stood there in sweatpants and a loose white shirt, hair still damp from a shower, eyes shadowed by a night that neither of them had truly slept through. He held his own phone loosely at his side, as if he too had grown tired of watching the world react to something it didn't understand. "It's out, Ore," Jimin said quietly. Jungkook nodded. "I saw." A long pause followed. "Well," Jimin asked, "how does it feel to tell the truth without saying it?" Jungkook leaned against the doorframe, exhaling slowly, like standing in the middle of a storm and pretending it's just wind. Jimin's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "At least we're not pretending it's sunshine." They stood there, suspended between relief and dread, neither willing to name which feeling was winning. From the television in the living area, muted news footage flickered, panels of commentators, scrolling headlines, slowed clips of the press room moment replayed as if history had been rewritten in a single gesture. Jimin stepped past Jungkook into the room. "They're calling it brave," he said, "and reckless, and manipulative, and historic." Jungkook let the door close behind him, all at once. "Welcome to public opinion." Jungkook sank onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. "Are the others okay?" "They're getting flooded with questions," Jimin said. "Some supportive, some not. Management told them to stick to the statement." Guilt coiled in Jungkook's chest. "I never wanted them dragged into this." "They weren't dragged," Jimin replied gently. "They walked with us. There's a difference." The words settled, heavy and humbling. Jungkook glanced at the TV. A panelist was speaking animatedly, subtitles flashing. "Is this a turning point for idol authenticity?" But he muted it completely. "I feel like we've become a debate topic," he said. Jimin sat across from him, elbows on his knees. "We've been a debate topic for years. We just stopped pretending not to notice." Silence stretched between them, thick but not empty. Jungkook's voice was quieter when he spoke again. "Are you angry with me?" Jimin looked up. "For what?" "For denying anything defined," Jungkook said, the word catching in his throat. "At the meeting." Jimin studied him for a long moment. "It hurt," he admitted, "but I understood. You weren't denying me. You were protecting something you didn't know how to name without breaking it." Jungkook's chest tightened. "I was afraid if I named it, they'd take it." "They still might," Jimin said softly. The honesty didn't feel cruel. It felt necessary. Jungkook leaned forward, elbows on his knees mirroring Jimin's posture. "Do you regret saying you love me?" The question hung in the air, fragile and explosive. Jimin didn't hesitate. "No." Jungkook's breath hitched. "I regret that you had to hear it in the middle of a war room," Jimin continued. "I regret that the first time I said it without hiding, there were contracts and legal advisors listening. But the feeling itself," he shook his head, "never." Jungkook's vision blurred. "I've known," he whispered. "I think I've always known, I just didn't know what to do with it." Jimin's voice softened. "You don't have to do anything with it today." "Everyone else is," Jungkook said. "They're dissecting it like it's a plot twist." "Let them," Jimin replied. "They don't get to write the ending." The words sent a shiver down Jungkook's spine. A sudden vibration rattled the glass coffee table, Jimin's phone. He glanced at it, then frowned. "What?" Jungkook asked. Jimin turned the screen toward him. A headline blazed across it. "Major sponsor REVALUATS partnership following controversy." Jungkook's stomach dropped. The article loaded, corporate language, careful phrasing, Words like brand alignment and consumer expectations, nothing definitive, everything threatening. Jungkook leaned back slowly, the air leaving his lungs. It's starting. Jimin watched him, eyes searching. Are you going to say this is my fault? Jungkook closed his eyes. The easy answer, the safe answer was yes. Blame the moment, blame the hand, blame the honesty. Instead, he said, no, this was always the cost of being real. We just stopped delaying the bill. Jimin's shoulders sagged with a relief he hadn't dared to expect. Another buzz, this time Jungkook's phone. He picked it up. A message from the head manager. Emergency call in 10. Sponsor concerns escalating. Be prepared. Jungkook stared at the screen, dread coiling tight in his chest. They want damage control, he said. They'll always want damage control, Jimin replied. The question is whether we let them define what damage means. Jungkook stood, packing to the window. The city below pulsed with life, cars streaming like veins of light, people moving in patterns too distant to decipher. Somewhere down there, fans were arguing, defending, celebrating, condemning. They could cut promotions, Jungkook said, delay releases, freeze projects, not just for us, for everyone. Jimin rose slowly. And if we pretend nothing happened, do you think that risk disappears? Or does it just teach them that fear is the easiest way to control us? Jungkook turned to face him. You're asking me to gamble with more than my own future. I'm asking you to decide whether your future includes you, Jimin said. The words struck deep. Jungkook's voice trembled. I don't want to lose this, any of this. Jimin stepped closer, close enough that Jungkook could see the faint tremor in his hands. You're not losing it, he said. You're redefining it. A bitter laugh escaped Jungkook. Sponsors don't like redefinitions. No, Jimin agreed, but people do. Silence settled again, charged and fragile. Jungkook studied Jimin's face, the exhaustion, the stubborn hope, the vulnerability he refused to hide anymore. Are you scared? Jungkook asked. Jimin smiled faintly, terrified. Then why do you look so calm? Because for the first time, I'm not pretending I don't care about you more than I care about their comfort, Jimin said. The confession hit like a heartbeat, steady, undeniable. Jungkook's breath caught. You make it sound simple. It's not, Jimin said. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also the most honest. Jungkook stepped closer. The space between them shrank to a breath, then less. If this destroys us, he began. Jimin shook his head. If this destroys anything, it was never strong enough to hold us. The words reverberated through Jungkook's chest. His phone buzzed again, insistent, relentless, the world knocking. He silenced it. For one suspended moment, there was no management, no sponsors, no headlines, only two people standing in the quiet aftermath of truth. Jungkook's voice was barely audible. Stay, he said. Jimin didn't move away. I'm not going anywhere. Outside, the world continued to argue, to speculate, to threaten. Inside, for the first time since the cameras flashed, Jungkook felt something unfamiliar rise beneath the fear. Not certainty, not safety, but the fragile, defiant possibility that love, unnamed, complicated, and fiercely real, might be the one thing the world could not take unless they surrendered it themselves. The arena lights dimmed to a trembling hush, and for the first time in months, Jungkook did not feel the urge to run. Backstage, the air still smelled of hairspray and overheated wires, but the chaos that once suffocated him had softened into something almost human. Voices murmured instead of barked. Footsteps echoed instead of thundered. And at the far end of the corridor, Jimin stood waiting, not as a rescuer this time, but as someone who trusted Jungkook to walk toward him on his own. Jungkook's fingers hovered over the dressing room door, the same door behind which he had broken apart night after night. The mirror inside still bore faint scratches from rings dragged across its surface, a silent record of panic he could no longer deny. He inhaled slowly. The breath shook, but it stayed inside his chest instead of collapsing into sobs. "I'm not hiding tonight," he whispered to himself. When he stepped into the hallway, Jimin's eyes softened with a fragile kind of relief, the kind that comes after fearing the worst for too long. He didn't rush forward. He didn't ask if Jungkook was okay. He simply stood there, giving him space to choose. Jungkook closed the distance. The silence between them carried more weight than any screaming crowd. Jimin's gaze searched his face, tracing the faint shadows under his eyes, the new steadiness in his jaw. "You stayed," Jungkook said, his voice rough but steady. "I told you I would," Jimin replied, "even if you pushed me away." Jungkook let out a breath that felt years old. "I thought the world was taking you from me. Every stage, every camera, every person who needed a piece of you, I thought one day there'd be nothing left." Jimin shook his head slowly. "You were never losing me. You were losing yourself trying to hold everything together alone." The words landed like a truth Jungkook had circled for months, but never dared to face. His shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in release. "I was scared," Jungkook admitted. "Not of failing, not of the noise. I was scared that if I stopped smiling, if I showed how broken I felt, everyone would leave, that you would leave." Jimin stepped closer, close enough that Jungkook could see the faint tremor in his lashes. "You don't have to perform for me, not on stage, not off it, not ever." For a moment, the world outside the corridor ceased to exist. No cameras, no contracts, no expectations pressing down like a second gravity, only the sound of two breaths learning to match again. Jungkook laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief. "Do you know what the strangest part is? The stage doesn't scare me anymore." Jimin tilted his head. "What does?" "Living honestly," Jungkook said, "letting people see me when I'm not perfect." Jimin's lips curved into a small, stubborn smile. "Then start with me." The arena manager's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the final encore. The sound once would have sent Jungkook spiraling, but now it felt distant, almost optional. He looked toward the stage entrance, where the curtain glowed gold from the lights beyond. Then he looked back at Jimin. "Walk with me," Jungkook said. Jimin didn't hesitate. They stepped onto the stage side by side, not as idols carved from expectation, but as two people who had survived the same storm and chosen to remain. The roar of the crowd surged like a tidal wave, yet instead of drowning him, it carried Jungkook forward. He felt the vibration through the soles of his shoes, through his bones, through the fragile place in his chest that had once held only fear. He lifted the microphone, and for a split second, the old reflex returned, the practiced smile, the polished persona. Then he stopped himself. He smiled anyway. Not the perfect smile, not the camera-ready one. A real one. The crowd didn't fall silent. They didn't recoil. If anything, their cheers deepened, raw and unfiltered, as if they sensed the difference without understanding it. Jungkook glanced at Jimin, who nodded once, a quiet anchor in the storm of light and sound. "I used to think I had to be everything you wanted," Jungkook said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the arena. "But tonight, I just want to be here, as I am." The confession hung in the air, fragile and irreversible, and the world did not end. Instead, the crowd answered with a wave of voices that sounded less like demand and more like acceptance. Jungkook's chest tightened, but this time it wasn't panic. It was something warmer, something that spread through him like sunrise. He turned toward Jimin, speaking softly enough that only he could hear. "The world didn't take you from me." Jimin's eyes shone. "No, and it never will." The music swelled, the final notes rising like a promise rather than a performance. Jungkook sang, not to prove anything, not to survive, but to live inside the moment he had fought so hard to reach. Backstage later, when the lights cooled and the echoes faded, the dressing room mirror reflected two figures instead of one. Jungkook studied their reflection, imperfect, exhausted, alive. He no longer saw a boy trapped behind a smile. He saw someone who had learned to cry, to confess, to stay. And for the first time, the dressing room door remained open.